The summer air in North Yorkshire carried a strange kind of stillness, the kind that settles just before something unsettling happens. Daniel and his friends had no way of knowing that this camping trip, just one weekend out in the moors, would scar their memories for years to come. They were young then, college kids with too much energy and not enough sense, chasing freedom in the wide-open countryside. There were 5 of them in total. Daniel, the theater kid, always quick with a joke and louder than he meant to be, had a way of masking his nerves with laughter. Oliver was the athlete of the group, a rugby fanatic who thrived on adrenaline. Marcus, the engineering student, was the one who had the car and therefore became their unofficial leader, despite being mocked endlessly for his nerdy obsession with machines. Theo, studying literature, was quieter, a little cynical, but always tagging along. And then there was Brody, more of a drifter between majors, who somehow kept the group glued together. This time, it wasn't about tradition or some carefully planned expedition. It was simply an impulsive decision. One Friday afternoon, with the semester behind them, Marcus suggested they throw some gear into his battered old hatchback and disappear into the moors for a week. One last summer blowout before real life catches us, he'd said. The idea was reckless, sure, but it lit up the others' faces immediately. So they went. They drove until the roads narrowed into winding country lanes, the fields giving way to wild, untamed stretches of forest. By the time they pulled into a secluded clearing, the sun was already dipping low, bleeding the sky in streaks of crimson and gold. The place felt untouched, hidden, as though it had been waiting for them. Marcus claimed he'd found it during a hike the previous year, and judging by the half-circle of stones that marked a forgotten fire pit, he might have been right. They set up camp quickly, tents pitched haphazardly, sleeping bags unrolled, beer cracked open before the last stake was hammered into the ground. The smell of charred meat soon filled the air, the boys grilling sausages over the flames while music from a tinny speaker echoed through the trees. They laughed too loudly, drank too heavily, and carried themselves with the invincibility that only youth can supply. Out here, with no professors, no exams, and no parents breathing down their necks, they felt like kings. But the moors have a way of reminding visitors that they are only guests. The night fell heavy. A dense fog crept between the trees, muting the firelight and swallowing their laughter until it seemed to hang in the damp air. Somewhere in the distance, a sheep bleated, long and lonely. Daniel thought he heard footsteps once or twice beyond the circle of light, but brushed it off as nerves, or maybe the beer. When the fire burned down to embers, the boys finally retreated into their tents, leaving the woods in silence once more. The next morning came with throbbing heads and dry mouths. One by one, they emerged into the pale sunlight, blinking at the emptiness of the clearing. Marcus stoked the remains of the fire while Oliver splashed his face with cold water from a plastic jug. It felt like the start of another lazy day in the countryside, until they saw the movement. At the edge of the clearing, in the tall grass just beyond their fire pit, a tent was being raised. Not their tent, a stranger's. The boys exchanged uncertain glances. No one else had ever camped here before, or at least, they had never seen evidence of it. This place had always felt like their secret. Yet here was a couple, older, unfamiliar, hauling poles and canvas with surprising energy. The man's beard caught the light as he worked, bushy and unkempt, while the woman's frizzy hair bounced as she moved about with a kind of manic cheerfulness. Daniel felt his stomach knot. Something about the sight didn't sit right. They hadn't heard a car arrive, hadn't noticed anyone approaching during the night. And yet, here they were, as if they had stepped out of the mist itself. Oliver muttered under his breath, "Well, that's new," Marcus, ever the diplomat, raised his hand in greeting. "Guess we've got neighbors," he said, but his tone carried a hesitation none of them missed. It should have been harmless. Just two fellow campers, setting up their space in the wild. But as Daniel watched the man adjust his strange, badge-covered hat and the woman smile too widely through her enormous glasses, a chill settled over him. This wasn't how their weekend was supposed to start. Something about those two didn't belong here. The first couple of days out on the moors passed in a haze of firelight, laughter, and cheap beer. The boys quickly slipped into a rhythm that felt both careless and comforting. They woke with the sun, shook off the night's fog from their heads, and spent their mornings wandering narrow trails that cut through the heather. By afternoon, they were back at camp, cooking whatever they'd hauled from town: burgers, sausages, bacon, anything that sizzled and smoked over the fire pit they'd claimed as their own. Marcus took pride in poking at the coals like a self-appointed chef, while Oliver always found an excuse to climb trees or race ahead on hikes, daring the others to keep up. Theo preferred to linger with a book, propped against a rock with his headphones in, the moors sprawling endlessly around him. Brody was the jester, cracking jokes, strumming clumsy chords on a travel guitar, and keeping spirits high whenever silence threatened to settle. And Daniel, well, Daniel watched it all, soaking in the fleeting freedom of youth, the sense that time was pausing just for them. Nights were their favorite. The fire would burn bright against the dark, sparks floating into the black sky. They told stories, some true, most exaggerated, until their voices echoed into the woods. The moors answered back only with the low whistle of the wind and the occasional bleat of a distant sheep. There was a strange beauty to the isolation. No lights, no roads, just them and the vast emptiness pressing in from every direction. Still, there were moments when that emptiness felt too large. A snapping branch would silence the circle for a beat. Shadows sometimes seemed to move at the edge of the firelight. And when the fog crept low across the grass, swallowing their laughter in its damp grip, the boys would glance at each other with the same fleeting unease. None of them ever said it aloud, but they all felt it. The moors weren't entirely theirs. Something out there was watching. By the third evening, though, they had settled into the illusion of safety. The woods were theirs, the fire was theirs, the laughter was theirs. It was easy to forget that secrets can linger in the quiet places, easy to believe nothing would break their spell, at least until the strangers arrived. It happened on the morning of their third day. Daniel was crouched by the fire pit, nursing a mug of instant coffee, when movement at the far side of the clearing caught his eye. A second tent was being raised, not theirs. The others gathered, groggy but curious, as the strangers worked. A man with a beard thick as wire hauled canvas into place, while a thin woman fussed with the poles, her wiry hair haloed in the damp air. They looked older, perhaps late 60s, and out of place in the wild, like a misplaced relic from another era. The group exchanged looks. They'd always believed this clearing to be their secret, a hidden sanctuary. Yet here were two people setting up as if they belonged. Marcus muttered something about being polite, then waved a hand. "Morning," he called, his voice a little too bright. The woman responded with a wide smile, her oversized glasses catching the light. "Lovely spot you boys found," she chirped, her tone oddly rehearsed. The man said nothing at first, only tugged at the guy ropes with methodical care. When he finally turned, Daniel's breath caught. That face. Beneath the heavy beard, Daniel saw something he recognized, those eyes, sharp and calculating even behind age and wear. Memory stirred like a shadow, pulling him back to the worn desks of secondary school, the smell of chalk dust, the hum of fluorescent lights. "Mr. Halden," The name slipped out before Daniel could stop it. The bearded man froze, then